Hello everyone, I am Chris Hussain and welcome to Critical Conversations with the Compass Foundation.
Welcome to all of our viewers across all of our various streaming platforms. My name is Narmada Ramjit Singh.
Hello everyone, welcome. I am Shanta Sipasad.
And well guys, we have a packed show for you today guys. We have our guest, Mrs. Anita Haynes-Alleyne, the Member of Parliament for Tabaquite and the Shadow Minister of Education. And well, later in the show, we're going to be diving into empowering education. And we're going to get into a lot of things there because you all know that entire education ministry has been under a lot of scrutiny for the past couple of weeks. But before that, let's get into some hot topics, shall we? And y'all, we have been following this budget. We had several persons on. MP Parry, we had Assemblyman Dr. Faith B. Israel, Dr. Valmiki, we had MP Dave Tank. We had a number of persons on and we discussed the budget. I also believe Dr. Indira Sajuan was someone we had on as well. And of course, as we said last week, and we went into the line ministers and the Standing Finance Committee and those things. Of course, now the budget has come to the Senate, and I believe it was a 3-day exercise if I'm not mistaken. And well, we heard from some of the newer independent senators like Dr. Patterson. I think she did a good job. We heard from Senator Maharaj, newly minted. I think she did a very, very good job with her contribution. But something was very interesting. I don't know if you all checked your social media, because I did. Right? And there's some viral videos going around, right? And a couple days ago, opposition Senator Jayanti Lakshmi, she shadows, I believe, the Office of the Attorney General and National Security. And so she contributed to the financial appropriation bill, finance appropriation bill for 2024. And of course, the minister in the office of the Attorney General, Senator the Honorable Renuka Sagram Singh Suklal, she would have put forward her argument. And you know the cut and thrust of debate, and it's we in Trinidad, you know, the peacock, the lil, we like that kind of thing, right?
For a moment, I thought she wasn't a minister, you know, she was shadowing Senator Lakshmi.
Well, it seems so, because I've noticed that she tends to go after Senator Lakshmi Dayal. And so she is in Senator Lakshmi Dayal's shadow. And she said a couple of things. I wanna discuss that a bit.
Sure.
Because she gave some good advice, and I think, you know, well intended. Mm-hmm. She gave some good advice to the independent bench. She said, remember your oath, and remember that the children are looking on, right? I find that to be a very good introduction. Very good. We'll be getting into the irony of it. And then she went on to say, right, that her child is 16 and your child is 4, so mine could understand. Right? But the children watching her. Yeah. And then she went on to say, the senator came here and told us about how she grew up in the Attorney General office and she mother and she...
Just so, her mother...
But isn't it true? Did she not grow up in the...
Well, because I believe Senator Lakshmi Dayal's family, I think her dad is a judge, I think her mother is a senior counsel.
Right.
Jayanti has 20 years of experience as an attorney. I believe she worked at the office of the DPP, I believe. So she has a track record. So I understand why on the government bench they would put her to shadow her, but it's not a fair match for Senator Sagram Singh.
What I was a bit concerned about when she mentioned that my daughter is 16 and yours is probably 4. Mm-hmm. Now I have seen Senator Jayanti's Facebook page, her social media, and I've realized that she's an advocate for autism because her daughter is autistic. So
you think
I'm trying to figure out, did Senator Sagram Singh Sukla, was she throwing a little shade?
You think so?
For Jayanti, in that, well, my daughter could understand and probably yours can't?
If that's the case, it's very, very unbecoming.
I think the manner in which she carried about herself within Senate, it was unbecoming of a minister.
You know, I'll be honest, guys. and she's a younger politician, so of course there's inexperience there, and she is again trying to shadow someone that she cannot live up to that experience, that expertise. She's, from what I understand, she's new to this because she was a school teacher before, and I want to compliment her on something. I think she ran a very clean campaign in 2020, and so I was a bit optimistic to see her appointed in the Senate.
Yes.
But I agree with you. I definitely think her line of debate and her messaging has taken a different stance.
But
I'm
I
shocked.
have followed her during her campaign in 2020 when she went for that St. Augustine seat. And you are right, she fought a clean campaign. Her presence, everything was very cordial. Now she has just gotten aggressive.
But do you think it is the aggression? It is a combination of she's frustrated because how can she, very new in her career, well, what it is so far, I don't know if we could consider it that based on her track, based on what she has been saying, if it is a career, that you think out of frustration because she's trying very hard to shadow Jayanti and she's failing, and now she's becoming the viral queen.
Unless she has a directive, somebody in the government or the party is telling her, hey, your job is to focus on Senator Lakshmi Dayal, and nothing else.
And it does not go in alignment with the show. She has a show called Real Conversations Conference, and she go around to different communities. And from what I understand, so she's supposed to be trying to empower young women. And so for you to say your mother and then your 4-year-old child, and then you're telling the independent bench, well, Olia, my advice is the children watching. So the children wasn't watching 10 minutes later in your presentation. The children were to turn it off. So I found that to be disgusting.
Right.
I found that to be the height of unprofessionalism. And I found that to be coming from a newer, younger politician. And we talk the things here. We talk new politics.
Correct. And I was not expecting this from such a young politician. Yes, given she may have the inexperience, but a young person, we don't want this aggression.
We don't want it.
And don't say that is passion. We're not getting the passion. That is aggressive.
Personal.
For a moment, I thought she would have gone across.
Oh Lord, no.
That style of politics that she's adopting is very distasteful, and it turns people away of anything. And that's not what we'd like to see in our younger politicians.
But I have never seen any other politician, new or old, practice that style of politics.
Really, Shanta, you haven't. I feel like the new, well,
we have seen it, but I found that what we have seen was done with a little bit of class.
Okay, I see that. I could see that.
For a moment, I thought she would have told me the price of carrot.
But that is easy. And I was interested because again, the president of the Senate, I think he's doing a way better job than the former president.
I think so. I would give kudos to him on that.
But I think I've seen where Senator Roberts has been cautioned about his volume. I think she's a very loud, and I am shocked that this behavior has been displayed in the Senate. The Senate is a different. So I wanna say to younger politicians, young people, we are a young ensemble here, and we wanna say that, well, if your intention is to practice old politics, make room for more better younger people, because we don't want old politics anymore, and the local government election statistics showed us that. But let's switch gears, guys. I saw we have the Express, Miss PRO of the foundation, the Compass Foundation. I saw that you put out a letter. I think you got a letter of the day.
Yes, we did.
Tell us a little bit about that and why you were so impassioned to put this out.
We here at the Compass Foundation is deeply concerned at the disturbing surge in attacks on Hindu temples. We have seen acts of intrusion, desecration, and vandalism targeted at sacred places of worship. This past week alone, we have seen the vandalism of the Taruba Recreation Ground, where Ramlila props were vandalized, desecrated, and destroyed. In another deeply distressing incident this week, we saw the attack of the Pranav Anand Ashram at Temple Drive, Bokaro. This attack, however, occurred as the temple was occupied with at least 80 members in attendance. This congregation observed Kanyakumari Puja, which is the culmination of our Navratri celebration. This puja involves children and it marks the end of our Navratri celebration. The assailants resorted to violence, pelting stones and debris at the premises. This heinous act resulted in extensive damage to the infrastructure and several vehicles. The trauma inflicted upon our young children is entirely unacceptable. We at the Compass Foundation regard this as an act of the gravest nature, a hate crime. And we urge each and every citizen to condemn any act of religious intolerance. We will continue to advocate for the safeguarding of religious freedom, and we would like to continue to emphasize our support and solidarity with the Trinidad and Tobago Hindu community.
I see why I got letter of the day. No, but this is an interesting situation we have found ourselves in Trinidad and Tobago. Modern Trinidad and Tobago.
And what was different in this incident from all the others? The temple was occupied.
Yeah.
This
So there were
occurred
persons
as
there.
it was inhabited. People were doing their congregational worship.
And as you mentioned, there were a lot more kids present at the temple because of the nature of the celebration. Around this time, you know, they invite a lot more kids to come and get their, well, party bags or however you want to put it. But it's really, really sad that a space that we think is a safe space, you now have to be frightened. Well, if I go to temple, what will happen?
I saw some of our politicians, they would have put out several statements. Shanta, I know that some of the, I believe an independent senator, he put out.
Yes, I mean, I must commend those who put out statements standing in solidarity with the Hindu community. We saw independent Senator Mr. Derup Timal, when he began his budget contribution, he mentioned, you know, condemning the attacks. Couva South MP, Mr. Rudranath Inarsingh, he put out a release as well. Chairman of the Couva Tabaquite Talparo Regional Corporation, Mr. Ryan Rampersad. And let me just give a shout out to Councillor Ryan Rampersad, one of the hard-working councillors.
One of our friends on the campus.
One of our friends on the campus. Yesterday would have been his birthday. A very happy birthday to Councillor Ryan Rampersad. And yeah, we saw releases from Dr. Tim Gopi Singh. He was in Senate. Even on the government side, the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Amory Brown. And, you know, it's really a sad day to see that in sweet Trinidad and Tobago, with the multi-racial, multicultural, multi-religious society we live in, we still experience, the Hindu community still experience these attacks.
What I'm noticing is that this is escalating, right? This is
Yeah.
no longer isolated incidents. They're escalating, and it's escalating during a particular time of the year.
Correct. You know, when I look throughout the years, it isn't a one-off incident where you want to say, well, it could be a mentally unstable person. Once every 10 years that might go and vandalize a temple. So apart from these incidents that happened within the last month to the temple and the Ramlila side, the two temples and whatnot, last year around this time, which would have been 2 weeks before Diwali, the Kali Bay Kali temple, that temple was vandalized. In 2019, June 2019, the Swaha Sri Ram temple in Dago Martin, the Murjis were set ablaze. Last year, incidentally, at the Karapo Shiv temple, and you know, this one hurt me a lot when I saw corned beef was cooked in the temple. In 2019, the Lower Makbeen Hindu temple and the spiritual head, I believe he's still the spiritual head, is the Dharmacharya, Pandit Dr. Rampersad Parasram, murtis were destroyed. And it's really a pattern that we see when there's Hindu festivals around. The temples are brought under attack?
Well, it's interesting because, well, I am not a Hindu, so of course I'm looking on, and I think definitely it seems as though this is a targeted crime on Hindu persons. I could recall going to school. I went to several, and I don't want to ill speak this school. It's not this school, but in the socialization of schools and throughout my time growing up, I remembered that the way persons speak about Hindu people,
Yes.
Shanta.
And you say that, and incidentally, every year around Diwali time, I notice this on social media where the comments are really outrageous, and it goes along the lines of, you would call Hindu persons devil worshippers, or let's say there's a surge in murders in society, you're gonna blame it on the Hindus. They're doing their thing for Diwali. When there's Diwali Nagar, let's say there happens to be a car accident, you're gonna blame, it's the Diwali Nagar and them people doing these things are causing these accidents. You would even see, I recall a minister advertising Diwali curry queue. You have it advertised as Diwali with the diyas and everything, but you're advertising chicken.
So there's a lot of insensitivity, and people feel as though it's okay to make fun of.
I want to quote Independent Senator Timon. I want to quote his contribution directly. And he says, what we need to note is that to take alcohol and to take meats into a temple deliberately to desecrate a temple, it calls for a really high level of organization and thinking from vagrants and mentally disturbed people. So this is premeditated. This
Correct.
is not incidental or coincidental. This is intentional.
Right.
And there's a difference.
Well, guys, as we said, we live in a society that we have different religions, we have different ethnicities, we have different beliefs. And of course, I noticed that the opposition leader, she also would have put out a release. And I just want to quote a few things from what she said. She said that our country, where temples, mosques, and churches are peacefully situated next to each other, sharing car parks, service facilities, and recreational spaces, we all celebrate and partake in each other's religion and festivals and celebrations across any political, ethnic, race, or social class lines. Therefore, it is dangerous. It is dangerous. It is dangerous to our society's peace and civil stability when intellectually lazy allegations of hate crimes and religious intolerance are thrown out without an iota of supporting evidence. While there is a violent crime crisis ongoing, modern Trinidad and Tobago is not a society of religious intolerance or religious hate, and I call on citizens to categorically reject those wicked and provocative suggestions. I want to know, what do you all think? I mean, I think I saw some persons, of course, in Trinidad, modern Trinidad, we have different opinions.
Absolutely. And I would like to quote the term hate crime according to the Department of Justice in the US. The term hate can be misleading. When used in a hate crime law, the word hate does not mean rage, anger, or general dislike. In this context, hate means bias against people or groups with specific characteristics that are defined by the law. At the federal level, hate crimes include crimes committed on the basis of a victim's perceived or actual race, color, religion, or national origin. Most state hate crimes laws include crimes committed on the basis of race, color, religion, and many crimes also include sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. The crime in hate crime is often a violent crime, such as an assault, arson, vandalism, or threats to commit such crimes. What are your take on that?
Shanta, What are your take on that? I mean, the opposition leader is saying that, well, for somebody to be to proffer that argument, you know, it's intellectual lazy.
Well, maybe. I guess if the corned beef was cooked at the temple,
Well, it was an act of I do have a kitchen.
let me go in the temple and make my corned beef.
Right. When they spray paint temples, what is that? Creative expression.
Out.
I definitely think that our leaders in society, before we be too quick to put out statements, we need to be a bit more sensitive and cautious in what we say.
So we have seen, and I've called all the years from 2018, from 2019, and so many temples being affected. So how much more have to be attacked for it to be a hate crime?
And I feel what pushed the boundary this time around was the fact that this temple was occupied with members and children who could have gotten gravely injured.
It's very specific.
Specific.
What we speaking, because you see, I mean, you called out a number of persons. Senator Timal, MP Indar Singh, Chairman
Ryan Rampersad.
Dr. Gopi Singh, David Lee. There are many persons who, in some way, have condemned this, but now we're hearing a bit of a shift in narrative. Even I believe Dr. Emery Brown would have condemned this. I'm not a Hindu, right? But one thing I do not like is discrimination. I don't like that at all. I feel disturbed about this. So I cannot imagine the way Hindu people would feel at this point.
And I grew up away, Chris, and we went to temple every Sunday morning. If there was yagyas or different religious observances, we went, and it would be in the nighttime. We didn't have any large temple car parks, so if you had to park 2 blocks away and walk, you would walk. You would walk in your sari, in your lehenga, and not once did the thought cross my mind that you can be attacked, or there could be an act of hate or a hate crime perpetrated, because religious freedoms are enshrined in our Constitution.
Right.
I know that in discussing this, we need to represent the entirety of the discussion.
Yeah.
The Mahasabha, I know you were telling me about, they put out a release, and they sort of held our opposition leader to account in her statements, and they would have condemned the statement, and they would have gone on to say things like, no one is suggesting that acts of violence were only limited to places of Hindu worship. But as the president of the National Council of Indian Culture and independent senator Timal said recently, what we need to note is that, and as you said earlier on, to take alcohol and to take meat onto a temple deliberately, I mean, I find this to be, we have lived in Trinidad. I know that you spent some time abroad.
Yeah.
But this is really an issue, I think, that we as a country, we need to not gaslight the population.
Yeah.
You can't do that. If we have statistics to prove that, it's almost as saying all lives matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this incident crossed all lines of decency, in my opinion, which is why we put out such a strong statement.
I know this is a very delicate and sensitive topic to discuss, but we, on Critical Conversations, we will be speaking about everything that is a critical conversation. And one of the things I want to congratulate you on putting out that statement, and I also want to say that we condemn all acts of religious intolerance, but today we are specifically standing in solidarity with our Hindu community. Stay tuned, we'll be back with more. conversations, and I know that we have an additional person who has joined us in set. This is our first guest that we're having in studio, so we want to congratulate her on being our first guest. But of course, guys, this is not anyone who's a stranger to public life or Trinidad and Tobago. I know I've been reading much about her over the past couple of days coming out of her budget, and so this is the Member of Parliament for Tabaquite, the Shadow Minister of Education, and well, from what I've been reading, persons have coined her as the national treasure of Trinidad and Tobago. So Mrs. Alleyne,
yes.
we want to welcome you to Critical Conversations. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It is indeed a pleasure to be here. It is fun to be on set. I enjoy interviews, but I really enjoy in-person and on-set discussions. I think, coming out of the pandemic and all of the social distancing that we would have had to do, it's nice, to be back with people.
So how are you? How are your day going today? How was today?
Today was good. We've had quite a number of office activities coming out of the budget. Parliamentarians are asked to spend a lot of time in Parliament and outside of their representative function, because we're in Parliament from 10 a.m. until about 10 p.m. For quite a number of days, and so we've been resetting within the office. I have a Saturday office day coming up, so constituents of Tabaquite, we are open on Saturday for appointments. In case you need to see me, I'll be in the office on Saturday, October 28th. We're doing our plan for outreach for the Diwali celebrations, as well as immediately following that, we would go into Christmas prep, and outreach. So we spent the last couple of days in making sure that we did some packages for sports groups, community groups, different persons within the community, so that they can write quickly to benefit from the grants that the government said that they would be offering over the next financial year.
No, we did segment one. It was a little bit of a controversial first segment of our hot topics. We repositioned how we would take on season 3 of Critical Conversations. And well, you entered the Parliament through the Senate, and of course in our discussion earlier on, I don't know if you got a chance, it was some viral videos going around of Senator the Honorable Renuka Sagram Singh Suklal, and so she would have taken a particular line of rebuttal in her contribution, bringing up things that, she has a 16-year-old daughter, and well, the person who she was rebutting maybe has a 4, and one might understand the debate over the other. And then she said things about, she have said, well, the former speaker, she's speaking about one of the opposition senators, would come here and tell us about, she grew up in the office of the AG and she mother and stuff. And it's becoming apparent now that within her rebuttals, it seems to be a bit personal. What advice you have for new young politicians who are trying to, I assume, debate?
Debating is a skill set. It is not something that that you are necessarily just born with. It is something that you have to work at and practice and learn from. You have to be willing to study what you would have done before, what works, what does not work, and then produce a better product every time you go to the Parliament. The PNM has for quite some time suffered from a deficit of debaters, both in the lower and upper house. That being said, the ability to listen and respond with a cohesive argument that requires understanding what your platform is, what your policy is, what your message is. What I noticed in this debate, in this particular budget debate, all of the PNM speakers came with a script. I looked at the debate in the upper house, and obviously I listened to the debate in the lower house, and everybody was just giving a rehash of the budget. So everybody got 10 points, 5 points from the 4 plus hour budget, and then they were told to repeat this because these are the deliverables from the budget. So message repetition in communications is always good. but message repetition from persons who are just reading lines of a script is useless. And so if they didn't understand what the message was or understand the point they were making to the public, that is why it fell very flat. And so what you found with Senator Sagram Singh Sukla was that she opted to veer away from her script and found herself with her foot very quickly in her mouth. And you end up like that because you don't have a political brand that you are giving to the public, and you don't have a message that you're trying to relay to the public in your debate. And so until you work on your craft, work on yourself, and work on what you are offering to the public as a representative. And while she's in the Senate, we will recall that she did run for the lower house for St. Augustine. So you have offered yourself for representative politics. So if you are speaking to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we'll speak to them with a measure of respect and give them a message, and they don't really want to hear what your opinions on other senators are.
Well, I mean, well, that is some good advice. I hope they are listening and they will take you and find it.
You know, Chris, when we did our first youth parliament, you forgot to mention we met Senator Haynes. She was a senator at the time, and she was one of the judges. Yes, judging both of us.
Correct, I did.
And you know, I could sit here today and proudly boast that the youth parliamentarians, we do a better job than the actual parliamentarians. You know,
yes.
We understand what it is we as young people expect, and we deliver that when we are given that youth opportunity. And it's unfortunate that our younger politicians, they don't do the same.
I think it's an understanding as well. So I've noticed, I've had the opportunity to judge youth parliament, also had the opportunity of being the speaker in the Commonwealth Youth Parliament last year, and a lot of interaction with persons who are interested in the political field, however it may work out going forward, because I mean this field can take you in many different places, inside and outside of representative politics. And what I have noticed is that those of us who have existed all of our lives with devices in our hands, cell phones, access to the internet, etc., with the transfer of information being so quick and so permanent, that we've always understood that you have to get your message across very quickly. You have to get your message across, so that means you have to understand, internalize your message, and then be able to deliver it in a way that will capture a wide audience. Parliamentarians who existed before the internet age was speaking to a smaller audience at any given time. We always speak to a very large, very permanent audience, and so you find those of us usually are a lot more careful with the messages that you put out there. And so I mean, looking on how quickly the response of the senator was clipped and shared, and that has happened to her before. It has happened to others. It has happened to Keith Colport, Scotland, if you remember last year's budget.
The bicycle guy.
Correct. And so and which is why I assume they were so scripted this year, to avoid those types of mistakes.
Right.
And so you get to the space and you see again how, when you put yourself in this place where you opted for a certain type of rebuttal style, and you contradict yourself in quick fashion, right? Because in the beginning you're talking about what type of example that you ought to set, and then you set a bad example right after. I mean, it's almost too easy.
It's but you shadow education.
I do.
And you have been one of the persons, I think one of the more effective shadows.
I appreciate that.
In that what you have advocated for, and I'm speaking, when I say effective, I'm talking in terms of our history in politics, right? So it's not just this parliament, throughout the years. you would have advocated in 2020, 2021 for several policy positions to be reversed. And of course, I'm noticing that the minister, in her way, tried to accede to certain things, not everything, of course. So I think that is effective. But there's something that is, while we speak about viral videos, every day, we see these viral videos of young students, the future, the next generation of the next members of parliament, perhaps. And what we're not just seeing, it's a school fighter we're speaking about, and we're not just seeing one video, we're seeing different angles. And then we're also seeing multiple videos from different schools every day. And these are the ones that are recorded. So what about the ones that are not recorded? My question to you would be, what is your response to the frequent circulation of these viral videos showing school fights?
Yeah. I mean, obviously for all of us as members of the public, it is heartbreaking to see those videos. I mean, school fighting would have existed forever, I assume. But the levels of violence, what you are witnessing, the cheering on from the sidelines, the almost exaltation of violence is something that is extremely worrying to me. It is extremely worrying as well that once the videos get on the internet, how they are shared and utilized on so many platforms, that when we consider what we need to do in terms of rehabilitating offenders within the school violence space, when we think about it, previously I was talking about Parliament and the permanence of what exists on the internet. That consequence is not going to escape these children as well. The permanence of what will exist on the internet, and so that one day you may graduate from your high school and you find yourself in a world of work, or trying to access a world of work, and someone shows you a screenshot of yourself in a position that you really would have attempted to reform yourself from. And so I've said this, I raised this with the Commonwealth Youth Parliamentarians last year. I raise it with young persons that I come face to face with every time, and I'm hoping to use this platform here to speak directly to the younger persons who are looking on persons who are in school, that we have to be very careful. Our consequences for our actions may far exceed immediate consequences. And so while the violence itself is very disheartening, and we can discuss that, but the sharing and uploading of the videos, even if you are just one of the persons cheering on the sidelines, those things can have consequences for you. And so I urge young people to realize that while the internet is a powerful force for education and reach, it is also a space where things exist permanently, and so we would all do well to remember that.
Now, MP, how would you assess the Ministry of Education's performance in addressing these incidents of school violence? Do you feel that the current measures are effective, or do we need changes to be made? Okay, so I'll start by saying, asking everybody on the panel, how would we judge effectiveness in the instance of school violence, if we're talking about it? Our measure of effectiveness would have to be a reduction in the number of videos that we're seeing, or a reduction in the number of violent acts that we're seeing. That could be the only real measure that we can use. And so that having not attain that, then the only possible answer to your question is that we cannot be satisfied, because whatever they've put in place would not have yielded the result it was supposed to. So that being said, my approach would never have been to take a carte blanche approach and say, okay, let us dismiss everything that was done. I feel like that is almost a P&M style of governance. I would say let us look at and disaggregate what may be working, what may work differently, what we need to increase, what we may need to decrease, what we may need to remove overall. And in this discussion, we've been hearing things about
school violence matrix and whatnot, but sometimes you just really need targeted measures in certain spaces. So you need to assess your numbers of deans of discipline, what their mandate is. You have to assess your guidance counselors, whether or not you meet the requisite numbers in the schools. And that is not now putting a blanket number of guidance counselors across all schools. There are schools where there are more incidents of violence. So you concentrate in the first instance, in your short-term intervention, you concentrate the numbers of guidance counselors, deans, etc. in those spaces. And so you try to get a handle there. You work within the school system, within the curriculum system. This is something that I've said from the beginning. Let us get into these spaces where included into the curriculum, you have conflict resolution, you have spaces where you can insert how to dialogue and get use of communication to get past your differences. You have these students there for 8 hours every day. Utilize some of that time to take what we've learned from before. And so when I was in school, conflict resolution wasn't really a thing. But now it's something that you can get your masters into. There are people who are trained in that space in mediation and conflict resolution, etc. And so you can include that. You can include that in the curriculum as an immediate measure. And if you can't do it for all the schools, you do it in the schools where there's an identified problem. And then you start doing that work so that you start introducing things that will yield medium-term results, long-term results, and you take it from there. But what we've been seeing is a very reactive approach. What we've been seeing is as something comes up, we get a new announcement. As something happens, we get a new announcement. And what we need is not announcements, but targeted interventions, carefully curated actions, aimed at achieving a goal.
MP, I find that the ministry's reaction is always a one-size-fits-all approach to every situation. But is it that they act without data, or how do they assess, how should we deal with these situations? Because, we need to know these stats well. Schools in Port of Spain, schools in South, schools in the East, there's a higher violence compared, and how do they act?
Well, that is a difficult question for me to answer because my assessment is being made from the outside, and based on the answers I get in Parliament to questions that we've posed, I can safely assume that it is in fact without data, because, and even if they are collecting the data, they are certainly not analyzing it and using it to create effective policies. And so, when you have the Ministry of Social Development, which would have a database of persons who require assistance from the state for day-to-day survival, public assistance, food cards, food support, etc. You have that number. You then have the numbers of persons who ought to be in school. You have the registers, you have the roster. If you are looking on and you see that these children on record in certain spaces are on record as requiring assistance from social development, and then are on record as being absent from school on a frequent basis, or the test scores are not up to where it needs to be, then you can use those 2 data points and know that you need to send a social worker in there to assess whether or not, with a specific assessment as to whether or not the educational needs of the students is being met, and that they can in fact attain the levels of competency for their own success in the future. And that is how you would be using data to effectively make policy or effectively create change, as opposed to just having it there. You have it in ministry, you have it in this ministry, and then at the end of the day, nobody's looking out for the child.
MP, in the US, we saw a rise of school violence, which eventually led to a rise in school shootings. And this eventually led to a rise in mass shootings at schools. The first mass shooting that I vividly remember was Columbine, which took place in 1999. And 19 years later, there was the Parkland school shooting in Florida, which surpassed the death toll and Columbine, right? So this was 19 years, no gun laws, no legislation put in place to hinder the accessibilities of firearms, right? Given our porous borders and the accessibility of firearms here in Trinidad and Tobago, what can we do to prevent incidents similar to this happening here?
So I've long heard the question as to whether or not the gun violence that exists in the outside of the school spaces in Trinidad and Tobago would eventually permeate the school system. That would have been a very big discussion after the shooting just outside of Rose Hill, where the gangs were firing the guns and it was so close to the school, and even people weren't sure if it was coming from inside the school or whatnot. I think in Trinidad we absolutely have a gun violence problem. Absolutely. We absolutely have a gang problem as well, but you find that taking place in the space of persons who would have dropped out of the school system, and therefore they are not utilizing the guns as a response to bullying, etc., within the school system. Policymakers certainly must be really cognizant of the fact that as school violence rises, there would be significant elements of bullying within the school that allows for this violent space to take place. And so we ought not to bury our heads in the sand and say that these two spaces cannot meet. However, I think that where we are now, we are still within a space where we can use the interventions of, like I said, having the conflict resolution with the school, increasing school supervision, etc., that we can prevent what we would have seen happening in the US from still happening in Trinidad. And so I agree with you that we have to be very cognizant of what exists in Trinidad and Tobago, and how the violence within our society can find its way within our school system. And if we are deliberate, and if we have the political will behind it, we can prevent things from like that from happening within our schools.
Now, so we're speaking about the violence amongst the students, but of course there's a recent expulsion of a student. There's a conflict between, I think many of our viewers, I think we all would have seen the video with the student and the teacher, and it would have escalated. Of course, she has now been expelled, and there's a lot of conversation going around if what is going to happen to the young lady's life now, but then there are consequences for action. So there's a lot of debate happening with that. What is your take on that?
Yes. Well, I also saw the news of the expulsion. I would have also seen the viral video. In my personal capacity, I have a lot of empathy for the persons in this situation. I have a lot of empathy for a young person who is learning very quickly, because I believe she's 15 or 16 thereabout, who's learning very early on in her life that for serious actions there are serious consequences, and that is a lesson that everyone will learn at some point in time in their life. But having said that, it is not to view the situation without empathy for the person, without empathy for a young person who no doubt understands now the gravity of her mistake, of her actions, who understands now that she has found herself on a much more difficult path to success. But the path to success to her is not closed, it is just a little more difficult. And that is a consequence for an action. I also have a significant amount of empathy for the teacher who's involved in this situation. I cannot imagine what it is like dedicating yourself to a very noble profession, educating the next generation. That your expectation is that you go in there, not that every day will be easy, but certainly that you ought not to be threatened with violence because that is what happened. The teacher was threatened with violence, and therefore, while I do believe that as a nation and with various stakeholders, whether it be programs under Ministry of Youth Development, programs outside of different spaces, that they are available to this young lady, and that the representatives involved or persons involved can certainly help her along what I can understand now is a much more difficult path to success. But I want to encourage her and say that that in life nobody's perfect. We are not infallible. Things happen. We make mistakes. We make bad choices. We make bad decisions, and now the onus is on us to learn from them and to do better and to still pursue your dreams. I believe I read in an article that she wants to be a nurse, and that is something that is still open to her. It is. I understand the family is in need of assistance, and I will encourage anybody who can, who are in a space to assist, because if we try to save persons one by one, we will succeed at building the nation that we want to see. But to say that the expulsion was unjust, I don't believe so.
It takes a village to raise a child, and I think your message to our viewers, I think, is appropriate, that we all have a part to play in this. Because I also looked on at the students in the classroom, at their reaction, and the egging on the behavior, and the mockery and the embarrassment of also the teacher. So I agree with you.
MP, we saw some disputes at UB, some wage negotiations. Now, in light of your recent call for government action regarding the wage dispute at the University of the West Indies, can you provide some insights into what specific issues raised by the university staff, and what you believe that the government's role could be in resolving this matter?
So, with the UAE lecturers, you would recall as well, I believe it was last year, tutors also were pursuing some industrial action, in pursuit of better wages. And I've always maintained one stance with respect to wage negotiations. They are negotiations, and they ought to be met with good faith negotiating partners. And so a government of 000 and a hard and fast rule of this is what it is, and we're not budging, or no negotiation or no discussion, and everybody just has to be happy with that. I think that is not good faith negotiation. I think that as well, when we understood COVID-19 and you listened to the Minister of Health with respect to how much applause we would give to the healthcare workers, which is necessary and important, that we recognize the role the healthcare workers played during the pandemic. It is equally important, I believe, to recognize the role that teachers and lecturers played in transitioning extremely quickly into a space that they themselves didn't know what they were going into, how they were going to execute distance learning outside of devices and that very important discussion on connectivity, etc. We had an equally important discussion on how do you keep the classroom alive, interactive, how do you get your learning outcomes. I mean, look, when we opened here today, I spoke about how good it is just to be back into the spaces, right? And they had to figure that out on the go, and they kept our education sector going. They would be the first point of contact to ensure that students were keeping up with their schoolwork. I knew in terms of, well, we're looking at UE lecturers specifically, but teachers across the board who would have gone above and beyond in terms of getting work to students. If you couldn't get online via Zoom, etc., they'll get it to you via WhatsApp. They'll send it to a family friend if you had to get it. And they were so invested, so personally and deeply invested in the education of these children. including the UE lecturers, including these persons who are now faced with a space where they are fighting for a good faith discussion. They have to now stand out with placards and protests and do all of these things so that they can have a seat at the table to discuss something that in ordinary circumstances would be a very civil and open discussion. Government says what they can produce or what they can afford, what is possible, what is not possible. But that is when you treat people with the respect that they deserve, and I think that is what we see with the UE lecturers, that they are not getting the respect that they deserve for the work, the service that they provide.
We want to shift away from the discussion of the fights, the school violence, of course, the wage disputes. And I want to get back to the in-house debate, and I noticed that, I must say, there was a little bit of political matrix that played in the debate. Again, Shanta mentioned that we did use Parliament. So we understand very much the role of the government in terms of our Westminster system when it comes to debate the propositional argument, who is proposing it. Of course, you shadow education. I saw the minister in the Ministry of Education. She tried, she attempted. Then of course you would have responded. And then I think the actual Minister of Education came the following day, if I'm not mistaken, and she tried to form a rebuttal to you. I know that MP Hussein said the shadow of the shadow, and it's very funny, but what was that experience like, that the minister, I don't know, we felt this way, we spoke about this in one of our, last week.
It's last week we spoke about it.
She tried to avoid your scrutiny. You think that would be, how you felt about that in that moment?
Well, I mean, MP Hussein and I remain good friends from the Senate, and so even before, in my own contribution, I would have raised that it now appears that the minister wants to shadow me, and that's fine, because you're part of it. There's shadowing the ministry, etc. But when you talk about shadows in parliamentary system, is that you really just go after the person so that they'll speak and then we'll speak, because they raise the policy discussions and whatnot, and then we scrutinize and put our point of view on what would be the difference in governance if the opposition was to take that chair and the government was to take the other chair. I mean, I watched it play out. The minister in the Ministry of Education is not really known for her policy discourse. She's not been a parliamentarian who puts forward government policy within the parliament. That has not been her debating role, and it certainly wasn't in this budget debate as either. And so in terms of me coming in for the rebuttal, I prepare extensively, and I prepare for all sorts of alternatives. I read the Hansard of the previous year. I would go through statements made by the ministry throughout the year, and so I'm very versed in all aspects of the job that I have been tasked to do, and I was able to predict what the minister would say using the last 2 or 3 budget statements that you would have responded to as Minister of Education. And so it was not a difficult rebuttal for me. It was amusing. This is my, what is it, 7th budget, and still a young person in politics. I just really didn't think I would be somebody you'd have to duck and run from. I mean, I think it's a little too soon for that sort of thing. I mean, I wouldn't lie, I was a little bit flattered. But when you look at it, the thing is, it does show. Yeah. So, I guess very seriously, how much this government is afraid of scrutiny and afraid of a dissection of their propaganda. So the minister spoke about in choosing to rebut facts that I put on the table, which is the fact of school performance from the years 2010, which was introduced into the debate by the Minister of Finance, right? So the Minister of Finance introduced in via the budget statement, I mean, a rather ridiculous statement that school results, the academic performance of our students would have been falling since 2010, and so it's not a new phenomenon, and that's factually inaccurate. 2010, the People's Partnership government would have come into power and started implementing the policies that they believe would revolutionize and make positive change within the education sector. By 2013, those policies started to take effect. So you had things like the continuous assessment space within the education system, which the Minister of Education, in responding to me, cited the continuous assessment component as the reason for improved exam results, and suggested, which this is really what baffled me, as a person who's always been interested in education and interested in what it means to have an equitable education sector, suggested that that diluted somehow the examination, and that because the exam was easier, or the process was easier, that the exam results were better. And so what she's suggesting, I don't know if she knew she was suggesting that, is that they made it harder, and so yes, students are failing, but
they're doing better.
But we're doing worse and better at the same time. But it's also, it's so ridiculous, because globally, continuous assessment has been understood as an equalizer, and an equalizer not of reducing any student's performance, but by saying not everyone is a test taker, and so not examination conditions, examination days, one day, a couple hours, and you take one exam, and that is supposed to test your competency of years of knowledge. In the real world, you are continuously assessed. You get up every day and you do something and you're assessed. And so the continuous assessment space component with it, and now I say that as a person who's an excellent test taker and really not that great with continuous assessment because I found it exhausted, but you understood that persons, so that when you come in and you are allowed to do presentation, you're allowed to take quizzes, you're allowed to have smaller, less stressful exams, and show that you understand the work and you attain a level of competence, and then you get your grade, that you found that to be something that we do not want in our education sector. Mind you, they are looking at reintroducing continuous assessment into the system. So the hypocrisy, amazing.
And you know, interesting, you mentioned that you looked through the Hansard, and during your budget presentation you mentioned something from Bastille Pandey. I believe it was the
2003, his response as opposition leader to the budget in 2003.
Right. And we come so many years after and we are still fighting amongst these issues.
Yes, 20 years later. And what happened with that is, so I have a very interesting manner of prepping for budget responses or debates in general. And so I go through all of the documents, and I meet with members of my staff now, that I have members of staff, but in the Senate, well, you know, I met with myself. And so that
well, I just want to say, it seems as though the minister is meeting herself too.
Appears that way. And so we do, and you know, we look at what the party lines are, what is our overall or global United National Congress narrative, and we look at where we fit, what's the message we want to deliver. And so I came home from the office, so the budget was read on Monday. I came home from the office Tuesday, and I went to bed, and I got up, and something said, just look at what the discussion was like 20 years ago, because I mean, just to get a sense of what Trinidad and Tobago was like 20 years ago, what the Parliament was like, what were we discussing? And so the budget would have been delivered by Patrick Manning, who was Minister of Finance and Prime Minister. And Basil Pandey at the time was opposition leader. And so I'm reading this budget and I'm reading the response, and so many things are happening at the same time, right? So it was the beginning of the rise in the crime wave, and so crime was featuring very heavily, much like now, you know. And then you had this question, this this one, the paragraph that I eventually ended up quoting, which is that had we kept United National Congress policies that and Mr. Pandey would have stated that each budget delivered by the United National Congress during their time in governance from 1995 was each budget builds on the one before. And prior to that, I would have gone through, so I keep a running record of all the budgets of this bit of stuff, and they don't build on the other, but they carry a political narrative from election cycle to election cycle. So as opposed to being building blocks to development, they seem more geared towards an election cycle, which is not good for our country. It may be good for a political party, but it's not good for our country. And so I'm going through it, and Mr. Pan is talking about, had they, this is in 2003, kept the policies, you would have been further along a space for a knowledge-driven economy, and that he understood then, before the internet age and whatnot. So we would have had computers and some measure of the internet, but not as we know it now, right? He understood then the issues of connectivity, the issues of equity within the education sector, and the issue of preparing our students. In 2003, I would have been a student at that time, so preparing us for a new world of work and a new space. And I thought to myself, well, I said, I'm going to tell them that. Had they kept it, if you would listen, if you can get into a space where you understand that you ought not to practice slash and burn politics, which is what they do. You come in and you meet programs and you meet things that are working and you take it out because it's not yours. And you say, we don't want it. Right. And then you try to sneak it back under a new name or under a new ministry somewhere else later on. And now I've come to realize, I've known for quite some time, but the missing years of Trinidad and Tobago development, I think history will record it as the PNM years.
MP, you've been recognized for your ability to collaborate across party lines to achieve goals, right? And we must commend you on your initiative. How can we encourage more of this in our political landscape?
Our political landscape is by design adversarial, but it need not be ineffective. So that I understand that within our spaces, that my job as a representative parliamentarian, my first and foremost, I have a duty and a responsibility to my constituents, to persons who elected me to be their representative. And in that representative function, even as an opposition MP, you have to find ways to navigate the system to get deliverables to the constituents, all constituents within Tabaquite. And so I have a role as an advocate. With each issue, I assess what would be most useful. Is there a space for collaboration? If there is a space for collaboration, I will utilize that space. But if the space is not for collaboration, if it requires something more adversarial, then I would have to do that, because my duty and my responsibility is to my constituents. And so I'm a person, I like to live in hope. I like to believe that things will get better and that we can work towards a better society. And so I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. And you attempt to bring things within the constituency, but I would have had meetings. The Minister of Works visited my constituency on several occasions, and those were as I'm seeing what have been empty promises over the last 3 years, we have an undertaking now that that all the roads in Trinidad and Tobago will be fixed in 2024. So we'll see. And
Just in time for election.
2 months.
It's very interesting. Yes,
2 months.
correct.
We have a lot of time.
Yes, but recently I would have met with Minister Ayana Webster-Roy, who is in the Office of the Prime Minister with responsibility for the Gender and Child Affairs Division. In terms of that meeting, I found it to be very productive. I found it to be, coming from a space, Mrs. Webster-Roy and I have similarities in the constituencies we represent, with a large rural component, etc. And so there was a measure of understanding of what it means to connect rural communities to government programs. That will bring you into the development space. The technocrats were very helpful, and I look forward to a successful execution. And if there's one thing you can count on me to be is honest about the deliverables. And so if you didn't do it, I'll say, but if you did do it, I'll also say that.
No, but we also want to commend you, not just for that meeting, but the way you handled yourself in Standing Finance Committee. It was a very productive way in how you led off your bench in the examining of the books. But MP, before we wrap up, is there any final closing remarks you want to leave with our audience?
Before I get to my closing remarks, I will say though, Standing Finance this year, I took usually for the past 2 years it has been like getting answers in that moment. My approach for this year was to get data to be used throughout the year. And so I asked very specific questions that I needed the answers for to formulate matters on the adjournment, to formulate my private member's motion on education. And so it is less of an immediate answer and more of a medium-term strategy of getting data that we don't ordinarily get access to. So that is why you would have seen the difference. And so, I'll assess that strategy over the year. And so if you see something different next year, it's because it didn't work. But if it did work, then you'll see more of it, if it did work. As for the closing remarks, I want to firstly commend you all here at the Compass Foundation. A lot of our understanding of politics and a lot of our understanding of youth and young people's involvement in politics is within the two-party political system, but there is such a real space for political discourse outside of that. There's such a real space for us to get persons interested in and talking about the issues that matter on a day-to-day basis, on a national basis. And I saw you all did a program on women's health and so many things that I think will garner the interest of more persons going forward. So I want to commend you for the work that you're doing, and it is important work, equally as important as the work that we do in terms of getting young persons involved in a different type of political dialogue sometimes. I'm very happy to be here, very happy that you shared your audience with me today, and keep doing what you're doing, and to your audience, keep paying attention, keep hope alive, but keep paying attention and understand that you are the key stakeholder in all things governance related. You are the target audience, you are the key stakeholder, and use that power wisely. Use that power to create and build the type of Trinidad and Tobago that we all want and we all hope to see. And so those will be my parting words.
Well, of course, we wish to thank the Member of Parliament for Tabaquite, Shadow Minister of Education, for sitting here with us in recognizing our Empowering Education segment. And so thank you, and thank you for staying with us, and we'll be back with more. Welcome back to Critical Conversations with the Compass Foundation. We truly would like to thank each and every one of you for staying with us and viewing and liking and sharing and commenting, so you know, share the live, share the live, share the live. We'd also like to thank the Member of Parliament for Tabaquite, Mrs. Anita Haynes-Alleyne, for having such an interesting conversation with us in empowering education. And so with those few words, we want to see you all next week again, right? So same time, same place. This has been Critical Conversations.
Good evening.
Good evening.